Look, I've been doing xenobiology research for 3 decades now, 3 decades of studying every apex predator, every venom-dripping nightmare, every creature that evolution decided to turn into a living weapon, and I thought I'd seen everything worth seeing in this godforsaken galaxy. But then they brought her onto Station Kael-9, and suddenly my entire understanding under predator psychology went straight into the recycler. Her name was Kira Tavish. Just another human specimen assigned to our deep space research facility for behavioral study. 5 foot nothing, maybe 115 pounds if you counted her boots, wearing standard issue gray coveralls with absolutely zero weapons, zero armor, zero anything that would explain what happened next. The brass wanted us to run standard integration protocols, see how a human reacts to our collection of galactic fauna, get some baseline data, write a report nobody reads, collect our credits. Simple, routine, boring. Except the predators took one look at her and lost their damn minds. I'm talking about the kind of creatures that would rip through combat-grade plating to get at prey, the kind that had sent 3 of our previous test subjects screaming into early retirement. We had a Vexnar pack hunter in containment bay, 700-800 pounds of muscle, razor spines, and bad attitude, that had killed 2 Corvesh soldiers during capture. This thing was so aggressive we had to keep it sedated just to clean its enclosure. But when Kira walked past that bay on her first tour, that monster pressed itself against the back wall like a scared child, its spines flat, its throat exposed in submission. The observation room went dead silent. Dr. Helen Soros, our lead xenobiologist, a Thalrix who'd never been impressed by anything in her life, dropped her datapad. Actually dropped it. It clattered on the floor while we all stared at the monitors, watching this apex predator treat an unarmed human like she was the galaxy's most dangerous thing. Run the scan again, Helen said, her translator glitching slightly from her shock. The bay sensors must be malfunctioning. They weren't malfunctioning. We checked 3 times. Lieutenant Parth Janari, our security chief, built like a Gorthak tank and just as friendly, stood next to me, mandibles clicking in agitation. That's not normal behavior, he said, which was the understatement of the century. Vexa don't submit. They don't even submit to each other without a dominance fight. Kira herself seemed utterly unbothered by the whole thing. She stood there looking at the trembling predator through the reinforced transparent aluminum, her expression neutral, almost bored. Her heartbeat on the medical monitors, 68 beats per minute. Steady, calm, like she was watching paint dry instead of staring down a creature that could tear her apart in 3 seconds flat. Interesting, she said quietly, her voice so soft we almost missed it on the audio pickup. It recognizes the threat. Helen's head snapped toward me. What threat? She's unarmed, unarmored, and weighs less than a Rixtal juvenile. What exactly is it recognizing? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. But it got worse, or more fascinating depending on your perspective, when we moved to the next containment area. Bay 12 housed a Seraph Shadow Stalker, a creature from a death world where everything either kills you or makes you wish it had killed you. These things hunt by reading prey behavior, microexpressions, breathing patterns, subconscious movements, and they're so good at it, they can predict what you're going to do 3 seconds before you do it. Absolutely perfect ambush predators. We'd lost a handler during its transfer because the creature read his intention to use the stun prod and moved first. Kira walked up to that bay, and the Seraph started doing something I'd only seen once before in the wild: displacement behavior. The kind of nervous energy animals show when they're caught between fight and flight instincts, but can't commit to either. It paced, yes, but not like a predator tracking prey, more like a prey animal looking for an escape route. Its sensory whiskers kept twitching, pulling back, then extending, then pulling back again, like it couldn't figure out what signals it was reading from her. That's impossible, breathed Yanni Torres, our human liaison. Yeah, we had another human on staff, but Yanni was an academic, soft around the edges, the kind who'd never seen real violence. Seraph don't get confused. They're apex cognitive hunters. They always know what their prey is thinking. Kira tilted her head slightly. studying the creature with the same clinical detachment she'd shown the Vexna. The Seraph froze mid-pace, its 8 eyes fixed on her, and I swear, on my ancestors' genes, I saw that thing's pupils dilate in what could only be described as fear. "It's reading me just fine," Kira said, still in that quiet voice that somehow carried authority. "It just doesn't like what it's reading." Parth moved closer to the bay controls, his hand hovering near the emergency containment button. "Explain," he demanded, his tactical training overriding his usual deference to civilian researchers. Kira finally looked away from the predator, and the Seraph visibly relaxed, like a pressure valve had been released. Turning to face us in the observation room, through the one-way mirror, her eyes seemed to find each of us individually, and I felt something cold walk down my spine. "It's reading accurate threat assessment," she explained, like she was discussing weather patterns. "Predators evolve to recognize other predators. The dangerous ones don't broadcast threat, they just exist as threat. The Seraph knows I could kill it before it could kill me, so its instincts are screaming at it to avoid engagement." "That's absurd," Helen said, but her translator carried less conviction than her words. "You're unarmed, you're outnumbered, you're physically outmatched by every creature in this facility." Kira's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, amusement, maybe, or pity. "You're thinking like prey," she said simply. "Prey needs weapons. Predators are weapons." The silence in that observation room was so thick you could have packed it in a cargo container and shipped it. Yanni looked like someone had just explained that the sky was actually green and we'd all been colorblind our entire lives. Helen's scales were doing that color shift thing they do when she's deeply disturbed. Parth's hand was still on that emergency button. I pulled up Kira's file on my personal display, scrolling through the data with new eyes. Human, 29 standard years. Former military designation, redacted. Previous assignment, redacted. Skills listed, redacted, redacted. Every important detail about her past locked behind security clearances I didn't have and probably wouldn't want. "Who authorized her transfer to this facility?" I asked quietly. Parth checked his own display, mandibles clicking faster. "Command-level authorization. Triple encrypted routing. Signed by Admiral Kovacs himself." He looked up, meeting my eyes. This wasn't a standard assignment. "No," I agreed, watching Kira on the monitor as she moved to the next containment bay. "It really wasn't." Bay 15 contained something we weren't supposed to have, a juvenile Drathkar, smuggled out of quarantine space for research purposes, that probably violated 17 different interstellar treaties. Drathkar are pack hunters with a collective intelligence, meaning they share sensory data and tactical processing across the group. 1 Drathkar is dangerous, 2 are lethal, 3 are a military-grade threat. Even a juvenile operating alone should have been formidable. This one took a single look at Kira and started making distress calls. Not aggressive posturing, not territorial displays. Distress calls, the kind juveniles make when separated from the pack and facing something they can't handle. The audio was pitched so high it made our equipment squeal until Helen adjusted the filter. Through the bay window, we watched the juvenile Drathkar press itself into the corner farthest from where Kira stood. Its 4 arms wrapped around its own torso in a protective gesture that was honestly kind of heartbreaking. "That's a pack species," Yanni said, his voice strained. "It should be trying to establish dominance or at least assess her as potential prey." "Why is it acting like it's terrified?" Parth finished. His hand hadn't left that emergency button. "Smart male." Kira stood there for maybe 30 seconds, just observing, her expression unchanged. Then she did something that made every alarm bell in my head start ringing. She placed her hand flat against the transparent aluminum barrier, fingers spread, completely relaxed. The Drathkar juvenile whimpered. Actually whimpered. I'd never heard one of those creatures make a sound like that. "They're not reading physical threat," Kira said, and I realized she was explaining for our benefit, like a teacher addressing particularly slow students. "They're reading intent, capacity, willingness." She paused, tilted her head again in that unsettling way she had. "Predators don't survive by fighting unnecessary battles. They survive by knowing which fights to avoid. And they're deciding to avoid you, I said, finally finding my voice. All of them. Every single apex predator in this facility is deciding you're not worth fighting. Yes? Kira agreed simply. Why? Helene demanded, her professional composure cracking. What are they sensing? What makes you register as a greater threat than creatures with venom, talons, pack tactics, and killing instincts refined over millions of years of evolution? Kira turned away from the Drathka Bay, and for the first time since arriving at Station Kael-9, she smiled. It wasn't a friendly expression. It was the kind of smile that made me grateful there was reinforced security glass between us. Because I'm not playing evolution's game, she said quietly. I'm playing humanity's game, and humanity's game is win by any means necessary. She started walking toward the next bay, her footsteps eerily silent despite the metal flooring. These predators evolved to survive. Humans evolved to make sure nothing else does. Over the next 2 hours, we took Kira through every containment bay in the facility. 16 different species. 16 apex predators from 16 death worlds, spread across 3 spiral arms. Every single one of them reacted the same way: fear, submission, avoidance, or some combination of all 3. The Korsh Viper, which had venom potent enough to drop a Gorthak in 30 seconds, retreated until it couldn't retreat anymore. The Threx Slasher, which had killed its own reflection thinking it was a rival, went docile. The Varex Pack Hunters, which coordinated attacks with military precision, scattered to opposite corners of their enclosure and wouldn't regroup while she was present. It was during the last test, Bay 23, containing a creature we'd labeled as Subject Omega because we couldn't pronounce its actual species designation, that things got truly weird. Subject Omega was something we'd discovered on a rogue planet in uncharted space, possibly the most dangerous thing in our entire collection. It had adaptive camouflage, could manipulate its skeletal structure to fit through spaces a quarter its size, and secreted a paralytic compound through its skin. It had killed 4 capture team members before they managed to contain it using drone-operated systems. We didn't even have a proper psychological profile for Subject Omega, because every observation team that got close enough to study it ended up requiring trauma counseling. Kira approached that bay like she was approaching any other. Same neutral expression. Same quiet footsteps. Same complete lack of concern. Subject Omega was invisible initially, somewhere in its enclosure, perfectly camouflaged, but the moment Kira came within visual range, it materialized, appeared, dropped every stealth adaptation, and became visible, its form rippling through several threatening configurations: spines, pseudopods, serrated appendages, trying different threat displays. None of them worked. Kira just stood there, watching, waiting. And then Subject Omega did something that made every researcher in that observation room simultaneously reach for their recording equipment. It vocalized. We didn't even know it could vocalize. In 2 years of study, we'd never heard it make a sound beyond the scraping of its appendages on metal. But it vocalized for Kira, a low-frequency vibration that our translation algorithms struggled to parse. When the computer finally spit out a rough interpretation, Helene read it aloud, her voice hollow. Acknowledgement of superior predator. Request for territorial separation. It's negotiating, Yanni said, disbelief dripping from every syllable. Subject Omega is trying to negotiate with her. Subject Omega continued vocalizing, the translation becoming clearer as the algorithms adapted. This one recognizes. This one does not challenge. This one requests distance. Kira placed both hands against the barrier this time, leaning forward slightly, and spoke clearly enough for the bay's audio pickups to catch. Acknowledged, no harm intended. Maintain current territory. Subject Omega's form rippled once more. Not a threat display this time, but what our behavioral database later identified as a relief response, and then it retreated to the far corner of its enclosure, curled into a defensive posture and stayed there. Parts translator finally gave up trying to process his rapid-fire clicking, spitting out garbled fragments before falling silent. Helene was frantically making notes, her hands shaking slightly. Yanni looked like he was reconsidering every career choice that had led him to this moment. I just stood there, staring at the monitors, trying to reconcile what I'd just witnessed with everything I thought I knew about predator behavior, human biology, and basic common sense. I need a drink, I said to nobody in particular. I need several drinks, actually, and possibly a new career. Kira stepped away from Subject Omega's bay, turned to face the one-way mirror, facing us directly, though she shouldn't have been able to see through it, and spoke clearly. You wanted to study how humans integrate with galactic fauna. Here's your baseline data. We don't integrate. We dominate. We negotiate. Or we eliminate. The predators in this facility understand that instinctively. They're acting rationally based on accurate threat assessment. She paused, and that unsettling smile returned. Any questions? We had about 1,000 questions, but before anyone could vocalize one, the station's emergency klaxons started blaring and 3 things happened simultaneously. Every containment bay status light on Helen's main console went from green to amber. Parth's security feed lit up like a festival display showing breach alerts from the lower decks, and my personal communicator started screaming about a catastrophic failure in the central environmental control system. Talk to me, Parth barked, already moving toward the exit, his sidearm materializing in his primary manipulator with practiced efficiency. Helen's fingers danced across her console, pulling up diagnostics faster than I could track. Containment integrity holding on all bays, but something triggered a station-wide lockdown protocol. She stopped, scales going pale. No. That's not a lockdown protocol. That's someone manually opened the emergency vent shafts. All of them. Simultaneously. My stomach, already questionable at the best of times, tried to relocate to somewhere around my lower intestines. The emergency vent shafts connected every section of Station Kael-9, designed to equalize pressure during catastrophic hull breaches. They were also the perfect highway for anything small enough and motivated enough to use them. Please tell me our containment protocols prevent automatic release during vent activation. Yes, Helen interrupted, still frantically typing. But if something already escaped before the vents opened, the lights went out. Emergency illumination kicked in 3 seconds later, bathing everything in that sickly red glow that meant things had gone from bad to catastrophically worse. Through the observation window, I could see Kira hadn't moved, still standing there in that same relaxed posture, but her head was tilted slightly, listening. Security feed from lower deck 7, Parth said, his voice tight, pulling it up on main display. The monitor flickered to life, showing a corridor that had, until about 30 seconds ago, been a routine maintenance section. Now it looked like someone had redecorated using claw marks, scattered equipment, and what I really hoped was hydraulic fluid, but probably wasn't. The timestamp showed this had happened 8 minutes ago. What did that? Yanni whispered, pressing closer to the screen. Before anyone could answer, something moved at the edge of the frame, fast, low to the ground, using the shadows and emergency lighting to its advantage. My xenobiology training kicked in automatically, analyzing movement patterns, and my blood went cold when I recognized the gate. That's a Korsh Viper, I said slowly. Bay 9. How the hell did a Korsh Viper get out of containment? It didn't, Helen replied, pulling up Bay 9's status. Bay 9 shows secure. Whatever opened those vents, it happened after something else compromised the containment fields from the inside. Her display changed, showing a cascade failure timeline. Look, someone with override authorization disabled the magnetic locks on bays 4, 9, and 12 at exactly 0700 hours. Then they triggered the environmental controls. This was planned. Parth's mandibles were clicking so fast they were practically humming. Sabotage. Someone wanted those creatures loose. He spun toward his security panel, activating station-wide emergency response teams, sealing critical sections, initiating. Your emergency response teams won't help, Kira said calmly. And we all jumped because she was somehow inside the observation room now, standing right behind Yanni, who let out a very undignified yelp and scrambled backward so fast he hit the wall. How did you? The door was locked, Helen sputtered. Kira ignored the question, moving to Parth's console and examining the security feeds with quick, efficient glances. Korsh Viper in Section 7 heading toward life support. Vexnar Pack Leader in Section 12, hunting near the fuel processing systems. Sereth Shadow Stalker. Location unknown, which means it's already where it wants to be. She tapped the screen showing Bay 4. And your subject Omega is still in containment, which is interesting because it's the only creature here smart enough to actually orchestrate this kind of breach. You're saying Omega planned this? I asked, my brain struggling to keep up. No, Kira replied, already moving toward the door. I'm saying Omega is the only one smart enough, but it's still in its bay, which means something smarter did this. Something that understands station systems, security protocols, and predator behavior. She paused at the door, looking back at us. Which one of your staff has been acting strange lately? Missing shifts? Accessing systems they shouldn't? The silence that followed was deafening. Then Helen's face went through about 6 different shades of distress. Dr. Varun Cortez, our xenopsychology specialist. He called in sick 3 days ago, but his access credentials were used to authorize equipment transfers from. She pulled up the logs from the armory. Stun weapons, plasma cutters, emergency containment gear. All signed out under his authorization. He's not sick, Parth growled, already pulling up Cortez's last known location. He's running an extinction event scenario. Release the predators, let them cause chaos while everyone's distracted, then escape during the confusion with. He trailed off, looking at Kira. With research data, biological samples. Things that would be worth a fortune to the right buyers. Kira nodded once, sharp and efficient. Corporate espionage using mass murder as a distraction. Creative. She checked something on her personal display. When had she gotten one of those? And her expression hardened. The Korsh Viper is heading for environmental controls because someone programmed it to. They're scent-motivated hunters. Leave a pheromone trail, and they'll follow it anywhere. Once it reaches life support, it'll start pumping venom into the air circulation system. Station-wide casualty event within 20 minutes. That's insane, Yanni protested. Cortez worked here for 3 years. Why would he? Credits, Kira said simply. Or ideology, or blackmail. Motivation doesn't matter right now, containment does. She looked at Parth. You have a weapons locker in this section. Parth's hand hovered over his console controls. Clearly torn between protocol and pragmatism. Restricted access. Security personnel only. I can't You can, and you will, Kira interrupted. Her voice carrying that same quiet authority that had made Subject Omega negotiate. Because your security personnel are either scattered across 12 decks trying to herd nightmares, already dead, or about to be. You need someone who knows how to handle apex predators without backup, without heavy weapons, and without making this situation worse. She paused. That's not them. That's me. The look that passed between Parth and Helen conveyed about 30 seconds of rapid debate in the space of 2 heartbeats. Then, Parth's shoulders slumped slightly. Defeat or relief, I couldn't tell which, and he authorized the weapons locker. Take what you need, he said quietly. But if you're wrong about this, I'm not, Kira replied, already moving. But if I am, you can have my corpse court-martialed. The weapons locker opened with a pneumatic hiss, revealing an array of armaments that would have made a Sol military unit jealous. Kira studied the options for maybe 5 seconds, then selected a standard-issue combat knife and 2 flashbang grenades. That's it. Nothing else. That's your loadout? I couldn't help asking. We're talking about creatures that can rip through combat armor. And you're taking a knife? She tested the knife's weight, checked the edge with professional efficiency, and slotted it into a sheath on her belt with the ease of long practice. Guns make noise. Noise attracts attention. Attention gets people killed. She pocketed the grenades. Besides, I told you earlier, prey needs weapons. Predators are weapons. Then she was gone. Moving through the door before any of us could formulate another protest, her footsteps eerily silent on the metal decking even as she ran. Helen immediately pulled up every security camera she could access, tracking Kira's progress through the station's compromised sections. The rest of us crowded around her console, watching like it was the galaxy's most horrifying entertainment feed. Kira moved through the corridors with a fluidity that didn't match her earlier calm demeanor. This was pure efficiency. Every step calculated, every corner checked with tactical precision, that spoke of extensive training in exactly this kind of scenario. She avoided the main corridors, using maintenance shafts and service tunnels that shouldn't have been on any civilian map, navigating like she'd memorized the station's entire layout in the few hours since arriving. How does she know where she's going? Yanni breathed. She memorized the station schematic during her intake briefing, Parth said, his translator carrying a mix of respect and unease. I watched her scan the emergency evacuation routes for exactly 90 seconds. She didn't ask questions, didn't request clarification, just absorbed it. On screen, Kira dropped through a vertical shaft, caught herself 3 levels down with a precision that would have broken a normal person's arms, and kept moving. The camera feeds were getting spotty, damage from the breach, or Cortez sabotaging surveillance, but we caught enough glimpses to track her general direction. Section 7. Where the Kira Viper was heading for life support. The next clear feed showed Kira entering the environmental control chamber through a maintenance hatch, dropping into a crouch the moment her feet hit the deck. The room was a maze of processing tanks, air scrubbers, and circulation conduits. Perfect ambush terrain for a creature that used venom and stealth as primary hunting tools. She's insane, Helen muttered. The Viper could be anywhere in there. One bite and Kira moved. Not toward the center of the room where the main controls were, but along the outer wall, her movement so smooth and controlled she barely disturbed the air. She was tracking something. We couldn't see what, but her head kept tilting at specific intervals, listening, sensing, processing information faster than our cameras could capture. Then she stopped, perfectly still, and reached into her pocket. The flashbang detonated with a brilliant flare of light and sound that whited out our camera feed for 3 full seconds. When the image returned, the Kira Viper was thrashing on the deck, its photosensitive organs overloaded, its echolocation completely scrambled. It was striking blindly, pumping venom into empty air. 800 pounds of disoriented rage looking for something to kill. Kira walked up to it, calm as someone approaching a domestic pet, and drove her knife through the soft spot behind its sensory cluster with surgical precision. The Viper spasmed once, twice, then went limp. Clean, efficient, no wasted movement. That shouldn't be possible, I said, staring at the screen. Kira Vipers have distributed nervous systems. A single strike shouldn't. She severed its primary ganglion, Helen interrupted, her voice distant, analytical. The one spot that would cause immediate paralysis without triggering death throes. Most xenobiologists don't even know that vulnerability exists, because it requires a perfect angle, perfect depth, and perfect timing. She looked up from her console. Kira just did it in the middle of a combat scenario after disorienting her target with a flashbang. Kira was already moving again, heading for the next threat, not even waiting to confirm the kill. On Parth's tactical display, the Vexnar pack leader's location pinged in Section 12, and Kira was heading straight for it. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. We watched through fragmented camera feeds as Kira systematically hunted down each escaped predator with a methodology that was honestly terrifying in its precision. The Vexnar pack leader tried to ambush her from an overhead duct. She'd already placed her second flashbang above the vent and triggered it the moment it emerged, then dispatched it with that same clinical efficiency while it was still stunned. 2 Threx slashers working in tandem, she used their own territorial instincts against them, manipulating their positions until they attacked each other, then finished off the survivor. But it was the Seraph Shadow Stalker that really demonstrated what we'd been seeing all along, what the predators had recognized instinctively when they first encountered her. The Seraph found Kira first. We knew because every camera in Section 19 simultaneously lost feed, the creature's electromagnetic signature scrambling our surveillance. For 6 minutes, we had no visual, no audio, nothing, just dead air and rising panic. Then the feeds came back online, showing Kira walking calmly out of the section, her knife clean, her coveralls showing exactly 3 tears from near-miss strikes. Behind her, the Seraph Shadow Stalker lay in pieces, not random pieces, but strategically dismembered sections that showed intimate knowledge of its anatomy and hunting patterns. She outthought a cognitive predator, Yanni said, his voice hollow. The Seraph can read intentions. It can predict movements. How did she? She thought faster. Kira's voice came through the station comms, making us all jump, and she predicted its predictions. Cognitive hunting works both ways. Yanni. The Seraph was trying to read what I'd do next. I was reading what it would do based on what it thought I'd do. I just had more processing power. A pause. Where's Cortez? Parth pulled up the tracer he'd placed on Cortez's stolen credentials. Docking Bay 4. He's trying to access one of the research vessels. On my way, Kira replied, and the comm went silent. We switched feeds to Docking Bay 4 just in time to see Dr. Varan Cortez, looking significantly worse for wear, carrying 2 containment cases that probably held biological samples worth more than the entire station punch-in override codes at an access panel. Behind him, a sleek research vessel sat powered and ready for departure. He was going to make it. The bastard was actually going to escape with his stolen research and leave us all clean up the mess he'd created. Then Kira appeared in the doorway, not even breathing hard despite having just fought her way through 6 apex predators, and Cortez froze like someone had hit his pause button. Dr. Cortez, Kira said pleasantly, conversationally, like they'd just bumped into each other at a cafeteria, attempting to flee the scene of mass murder. That's going to complicate your corporate espionage defense. Cortez spun, his hand diving into his jacket, probably for a weapon, but Kira was already moving. She crossed the 15 meters between them in less than 3 seconds, disarmed him with a motion so fast our cameras barely caught it, and had him face down on the deck with his arm twisted at an angle that made my own shoulder ache in sympathy. Security team en route to your location, Parth said through the comms, his translator carrying something that might have been satisfaction. Estimated arrival 2 minutes. Copy that, Kira replied, maintaining her hold on Cortez with one hand while using the other to secure the containment cases. Subject is contained. Stolen materials recovered. Station should be secure. All escaped specimens are neutralized. Neutralized. Such a clinical word for what we'd just witnessed. When Parth's security team arrived and took custody of Cortez, who was babbling something about corporate sponsors and legal immunity that nobody was listening to, Kira simply stepped back, allowed the professionals to do their job, and started walking back toward the main research wing like nothing particularly unusual had just happened. We met her in the observation deck. The same place where she'd started her facility tour what felt like several lifetimes ago, but had actually been less than 4 hours. She looked exactly the same as when she'd arrived. Same neutral expression, same quiet demeanor, same complete lack of concern despite having just single-handedly prevented a station-wide catastrophe. So, I said, because someone had to break the silence and everyone else seemed to have forgotten how speech worked. That was informative. Kira's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Your baseline data, she agreed. Any other questions about human integration with galactic fauna? Helen made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. How did you do that? You're one person. Unarmed, relatively against creatures that have ended entire security teams. What training? What augmentation? What possible preparation? No augmentation, Kira interrupted gently. Standard human physiology. Standard human neural architecture. She paused, considering her words. But non-standard human experience. We call it special operations training, learning to fight smarter, faster, and more ruthlessly than anything evolution could produce naturally. Because evolution optimizes for survival. Humans optimize for victory. The predators knew, I said slowly. Pieces clicking into place. From the moment they saw you, they knew. Not because you're stronger or faster, you're not. Not because you had weapons, you didn't. They knew because predators recognize other predators. And you're something evolution never planned for. You're a predator that builds tools, learns patterns, adapts strategies, and most importantly, I gestured at the security feeds showing the neutralized creatures. You're a predator that wins. Kira nodded once. Apex predators survive through instinct refined over millions of years. Humans survive through intelligence applied over thousands of generations. When those two forces meet, she glanced at the containment bay monitors, where Subject Omega was still curled in its defensive posture. Instinct correctly identifies the greater threat. Part's communicator chimed, and he checked the incoming message with visible relief. Station security reports all sections secure. Casualty count 3 personnel injured during initial breach, non-fatal. Escaped specimens, all accounted for. He looked at Kira with something approaching awe in his multifaceted eyes. You saved everyone on this station. I did my job, Kira replied simply. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have about 16 reports to file, and a debriefing with Admiral Kovacs that's going to be incredibly unpleasant. She started toward the exit, then paused, looking back at us. For what it's worth, you run a good facility here. Your containment protocols are solid. Your safety measures are appropriate. You just didn't account for human variables. That slight, unsettling smile returned. Nobody ever does. She left, her footsteps silent even in the quiet of the observation deck. We stood there for a long moment, processing everything we'd witnessed, trying to reconcile the universe we thought we understood with the reality we'd just experienced. I'm putting in for a transfer, Yanni said finally. Nothing personal, but I think I'd prefer studying something less apocalyptic. Maybe botany. Botany seems safe. Helene was already compiling her research notes, her scales having returned to their normal coloration. This is the most significant predator behavioral data we've ever collected. The implications for xenobiology, comparative psychology, threat assessment protocols. This could revolutionize how we understand apex predator cognition across the galaxy. Perth just stood there, mandibles still, staring at the empty doorway where Kira had departed. She wasn't assigned here for behavioral study, he said quietly. This was a test. They wanted to see how our predators would react to a human operator. Wanted baseline data before deploying humans to other xenobiology facilities, military applications, tactical scenarios. Wanted to see if their weapon worked, I finished. The implications settling like lead in my gut. We'd spent the day studying predators. All right, we just hadn't realized we were studying the right one. 3 decades of xenobiology research, thousands of documented apex predators from across the galaxy, and I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. When humans decided to stop being prey and started being predators, they didn't just compete with evolution's finest, they obsoleted them. Subject Omega was still in its corner, maintaining defensive posture, probably would stay that way for days. The predators had known, they'd tried to tell us. We just hadn't been smart enough to listen. Somewhere in the station, Kira Tavish was filing her reports, completely unbothered by having just redefined everyone's understanding of where humans sat on the galactic food chain. And I needed those drinks. Definitely needed those drinks.